If the Met Police and other force areas were a private company and they were relying on stop and search as their main service, they would have gone bust by now. Because in terms of useful resources and value for money, stop and search is actually a very, very overpriced tool. It is a tool, but at the same time it's a blunt tool. And it's sharpened up by community information, which results into intelligence. Now, you can't expect to have community intelligence if their experience of stop and search is very heavy-handed and at times draconian. And that's why stop and search has never really been a significant tool to reduce violence. It might be reducing drugs possession, but in terms of getting to the causes of wider criminality, stop and search has very limited scope, very limited impact. Because of what I say, it needs community intelligence. And a correlation of community intelligence is trust and confidence. So the more people trust you, the more they will tell the police what's going on. So you're more proactive and you're stopping the right people and not harassing other people unnecessarily. But what we've had for decades, before it was the sus law, which was based on the Vagrancy Act and a doctrine that was very racially profiled, the residual of the sus law is the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, even though it's more accountable and transparent, but it still has a racial profile. And here we have, even now, even the Home Office data unit says that less than 5% of stop and searches actually result in anything significant, whether it's some sort of acknowledgement, caution, or even being taken to the station. So as I said, it is a very, very undervalued tool if it's done properly.
Okay, so if we think about it, Section 60 of the Stop and Search Act, the act that the police officers are being encouraged to use, doesn't that hark back to the days of sus law?
Absolutely. I've actually said Section 60s are sus law on steroids because of the fact that, again, the disproportionalities. We've already spoken about stop and search, where you're 9 to 10 times more likely to be stopped if you're black than you're white. Section 60s is over 20 times more likely to be stopped if you're black than you're white. And again, you don't see a commensurate conclusion in terms of tangible outcomes, whether a weapon is found, whether that person is arrested or charged or cautioned, etc. So it's quite clear that those forms of enforcement are really to massage the ego of the police services to say, oh, we're doing something. And it is a useful tool to save lives. And there's no correlation. There's never been a correlation between if you increase stop and search, you reduce knife crime or other forms of crime. And if you reduce stop and search, those crimes go up. There's never been a correlation. Even the Home Office data unit has said that categorically. So when you hear senior officers saying, oh, well, in my experience, you know, it's a very useful tool, balderdash, it isn't. It has been shown to be more harmful to communities that you're trying to police in a positive citizen-focused way because of the experience they have day to day through excessive use of Section 1 stop and Section 60s. So it's totally counterproductive until you get recognition by senior officers who are holding their constables and sergeants to account to carry out the powers properly. You will get this distance and this disconnect between the communities and the policing. And just to say, I did a forward for a super complaint against the police service by the Criminal Justice Alliance. And I wrote a forward at length around this because I truly believe, especially when it comes to Section 60s, if you abuse it, you lose it. I think that power should be repealed if officers, especially the authorizing officers, don't do the proper thing and hold their officers to account, and don't rubber stamp authorities just to basically stop and search without reasonable grounds.
And in terms of your own experiences, you've written your autobiography called Closing Ranks. Have you ever been stopped and searched?
I was stopped many times. In fact, it's in my book and in the film that was inspired by my book called Small Axe. That was an episode of that Small Axe series called Red, White and Blue, directed by Steve McQueen. And the opening scene in that film is young Leroy being stopped in the school confines just after band practice. And, I was traumatized by it. I was only about 12 or 13 at the most. And I was in full uniform with my trumpet, just finished band practice. And here I am being searched by officers. And there was no reasonable grounds for it. And my book highlights these issues that a lot of people who look like me over the decades, from the 50s and 60s right up to present day, have been traumatized by the excessive use of stop and search or Section 60s, because it's a very embarrassing it's very embarrassing to be on the receiving end at the best of times, much less if it's very heavy-handed and the officers are being disrespectful and showing a lack of respect and dignity for the person they're searching.
And Leroy, as you grew older, as you joined the police service, were you stopped and searched?
I wasn't stopped while I was in the police service, but I was stopped afterwards, literally weeks after retiring in 2013. I was stopped, and I remember they were alleging I was committing a driving offence, the manner of my driving. And even though the officers were asking me to get out the vehicle, I said, on what power are you asking me to come out the vehicle? And they wouldn't tell me. I said, well, I'm not coming out the vehicle until you tell me exactly what the power is and what I've done wrong to warrant a stop. In the end, it was a road traffic matter about the manner of my driving, which again was totally exaggerated. And it was under 163 of the Road Traffic Act. And as a result of that, once they'd done the checks on me, I was told to leave. But one of the issues we found over the last few years is that stop and search figures are being shrouded by Road Traffic Act stops. So officers can abuse the system by stopping people under Section 163 of the Road Traffic Act and then go on to a Section 1 search, speaking to the occupants, searching them, the vehicle itself, etc., but only putting it down as a 163 Road Traffic Act stop. And the IOPC, Independent Office for Police Conduct, has realized this, and they've come out with strong recommendations, just like they've recently come out with strong recommendations with tasers, to hold chief constables to account around how they're manipulating figures of stopping people under 163 of the Road Traffic Act when they're actually carrying out Section 1 stops.
So let me get this right. You were stopped for a road traffic offence and they wanted to stop and search you under that road traffic offence so that they didn't need to put it down as a black guy that we've stopped.
That's their intention. But when they realized, or was I passed, I said, man of my driving under 163 of the Road Traffic Act, here's my driving license, go and do your checks. Subsequently, there was no need to search the vehicle. Thank you very much, Mr. Logan, because they knew who I was by then. And as a result of that, they realized it would be too much embarrassment and grief for the officers, because I would have complained severely if they'd gone any further. But how many people know their rights and responsibilities? How many people know how to complain in that regard? And that's what you're finding. A lot of people have been on the receiving end of 163 Road Traffic Act stops, and then it goes on to a Section 1 search, and they don't complain, and they don't even get a stop slip, and then the officers don't have to do it. And so it manipulates the stop and search figures. So I think those stop and search figures you quoted can be maybe 2 or 3 times higher, but they're not being reported as such. They're being consumed by road traffic stops. But I hope that the IOPC recommendations to monitor this will put a stop to it.
Can I ask you finally, the Home Secretary and police chiefs want greater powers to stop and search. What's the solution? What's the way of getting out of, we've got to stop criminals. What's the alternative but to stop and search?
I don't think you can leave the police to police themselves or monitor their own conduct, because over the last 10 years, 11 years, that's what's happened. Prior to that, after the first 10 years of McPherson, from 1990 to 2009, we had independent oversight of all of the recommendations, in particular stop and search. So the Stephen Lawrence Steering Group, which gave that oversight, chaired by Jack Straw and subsequent Labour Party Home Secretaries, were able to hold chief constables to account to say, well, why are you carrying out these stops? What the outcomes, i.e., it's not just outputs, the number of people, but what are the outcomes? Where are the results to show that it is a tool that's being used properly, objectively, and intelligence-based, and it's not seen as a fishing expedition, harassing people unduly, and as a result of that, causing tension, community tension, and reducing trust and confidence in police. Until you get that independent oversight, you will not get an improvement, whether it's Section 1 stops or Section 60s, because as I said, the police are not capable of being objective in this, because they're so steeped in that power or those powers that they cannot be objective. And senior leaderships are not holding junior officers to account to ensure that they don't abuse their powers. And that's why we're just going around this secular argument, decade in, decade out, because 1, the officers are not being held to account. 2, senior officers are in denial and saying it's a useful tool and it is value for money and it saves lives, but there's no correlation with that. And 3, I don't think they really appreciate the importance of community trust that correlates with the community intelligence that assists in directing your stop and search in a proper and coherent way.
Which is the independent body that can make sure it does it? Because they have the IPOC.
Well, the IOPC is trying to do that, but I don't think they're the body. I think they need to bring in an independent body. I know that it could run alongside the IOPC, but I think it needs to have clear, experienced people, very objective, not necessarily police officers, even though it will help if you have carried out stop and searches in the past, but it should be, has legislative teeth, so it can say to chief constables, hold on, you're out of order. I think in some ways, the violence reduction unit all across the country could have that role, because they're supposed to be independent of the mayor or any other government body and saying, listen, you're reducing our effectiveness in reducing violence and other forms of crime because your stop and search is creating barriers and not building bridges. And we need those bridges to assist in not just dealing with the crime, but the causes of the crime. And we know a lot of that is education-based. That's why, as I've highlighted in my book, Voyage Youth that we helped set up through the BPA Charitable Trust, which has been going for the last 20 years, give that input to young people to know their rights and responsibilities and buying into the community and being positive role models. These are the things that need to be highlighted. And until we get a real understanding of that at the senior levels, politically as well as in policing, we are going to find things are not going to get better. And in fact, they might get worse.
How much have we gone backwards since the past decade?
Well, I've actually said that the look and feel of policing reminds me of a pre-McPherson era, because after the report and the independent oversight around the implementation of the recommendations, we saw improvements, not only externally in the police powers and how it was conducted, but also internally in terms of a reflective organisation. It went from 2% to about 12%. That's more or less leveled off. It's about mid-teens at the moment, far short of the demography of London and other municipal force areas. So as a result of that, the whole look and feel of policing and the impact it's having on communities, especially Black and minority ethnic communities, we're not seeing any improvement. In fact, trust and confidence is the worst it's been in 20 years. Young people have said in our Voyage program, which I highlight in my book, Closing Ranks, they feel over-policed and underprotected. They don't feel that the police service for them. They refer to the police as a gang. They're the biggest gang, so it can justify some of the things they do. I don't condone violence or any form of criminality, but I can understand how some of these young people view things in that warped sort of way. And until we start to change the whole look and feel of policing by the narrative, by the independent oversight, by political will, we unfortunately are not going to see the improvements we want to see.
And it's producing a generation of, it's criminalizing generations of Black and Asian people, isn't it?
Absolutely, because if you're stopping people unnecessarily, whether it's under Section 1 or Section 60, and sometimes under the Road Traffic Act 163, you will find that people can sometimes be forced into the hands of the dysfunctional role models, saying, see, police hate you, other authority figures don't understand you, and we as, roadman on the road will, take care of you. Don't worry, we'll sort you out. And they get groomed and get sucked into that sort of cycle of violence. And then the other thing that can create this pipeline of young people getting into being criminalized is school exclusions. We found that there's a direct correlation between young people being excluded and getting into criminality. In fact, they say sometimes it's easy, you can say when they're going into the prison system by the time they get excluded or put into certain types of care facilities. So these are massive issues. And if we don't get to grips with it, we are going to create a parallel universe of young people who have turned their back on the authority figures, and they go by not just the justice system, they go by the street justice system. And the whole jurisprudence will be compromised because we rely on people to make a statement, go on an ID parade, give evidence at court. And if they feel that the police has no relevance to them and can't make them feel secure and safe, and in fact are just harassing them, then you won't get policing as it should be. Because remember, Sir Robert Peel, when he invented the Met in 1829, he said something very clear. The police are the public and public the police. You can't do it on your own. You have to build bridges and not barriers.